Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Housing Today, talking to a landlord by the name of Francesca Ranger. Thank you so much, Francesca, for joining me on the show on this Saturday.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me on the show.
Well, normally we have like a lot of questions that I'm going to throw at you just because you went through the landlord and tenant board system. And obviously, it's completely let you down. Obviously, the landlord and tenant board is supposed to be seeking justice to where justice is due. But sadly, we're seeing a lot of people not being able to get the justice that they deserve at the landlord and tenant board. But I'm going to have to make this one quick. I'm actually hosting a birthday party at the same time as we're doing Facebook Live. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in on a Saturday and get to know what is actually happening and get a voice. You know, we don't really have media picking up our stories and giving the whole situation and giving the landlords context to how you, for who you are, how you became homeless. And you were homeless for 18 months when you own a property. This is why we're starting to see a lot of landlords leaving the industry in Ontario in the rental properties, and they're getting themselves into other provinces or in other states because the system is completely broken. And that is the title that a lot of us are using is it's broken. And it's been broken for quite some time, and I think it's just getting worse. So how we have to do is learn from other landlords' mistakes, learn how the system is, but at the same time, we have to prepare ourselves as landlords to hold on for this ride that sadly the government is not being able to address for quite some time. So, Francesca, how did you get into landlording, first of all?
Okay, well, I worked for Minto Communities as a designer, and I lived out in the country in St. Isidore, and I had two children that were going to be going to college. So I guess I was nervous knowing that they would be driving to school 45 minutes in inclement weather.
Yeah.
And working at Minto,
Mm-hmm.
I saw I saw the value in purchasing places, and especially a townhome for my children to live in while they went to school.
Yeah.
And then when they finished school, I rented it out in case I ever wanted to live in it.
Nice. Well, usually what happens is always about that property for their kids because why pay such a high price for the room rentals when you can kind of own the property and they can take on more room. It's perfect strategy, especially for our kids going away for university. Now, once so the kids were using it after the kids were done, you decided to rent it out. Is that correct?
Yes.
And how long have you had that tenant for?
4 years.
And how was the relationship with that tenant when you were with that dealing with that tenant before you had to give her notice to vacate?
Well, actually, it was a him and his family. So a man, his wife, and 2 children.
Mm-hmm.
I actually never met with him. Um, I was married at the time. My husband met with him. He sounded very nice. Because I really wasn't in the rental business,
Mm-hmm.
and because I pay all my bills and I pay them on time, one way or the other, it never crossed my mind that someone wouldn't.
Okay.
Also, again, at Minto, there were a lot of investors that purchased properties for rental.
Mm-hmm.
And never once did anyone ever mention to me that they had had issues with their tenants paying or destroying the property.
So when you gave your tenant, so the tenant was paying on time. There were great tenants for that time frame of what, 4 years inside of your property?
Yes, he did pay. Okay, he was a good tenant. I wouldn't describe him as great, and the reason I say that is when I wanted to do an inspection of the home, um, he kept putting me off for about 6 months, and finally I said no. You know, you put me off for a month, then 2, then 3. It's been 6 months.
Yeah.
I really need to go in the home and take a look because I want to make sure the furnace, the air conditioning, everything was in good working
order.
Yeah.
We're always trying to get our inspections. We always say at least twice a year, you want to get into the units to do your normal smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detector checks, and making sure there's no leaks.
Exactly.
So it's good on you for at least trying. I wouldn't let it go that long, but we'll have to give a little tip at the end for our landlords who are struggling to get into these units, because it does happen pretty frequently where a tenant is refusing entry for the landlord.
He did. So that's when I first went on the landlord tenant board and looked at my rights.
Mm-hmm.
And then posted a notice on the door saying you have 24 hours and we're coming in one way or the other.
Yeah.
So that's when I first knew I was concerned.
Mm-hmm.
He also had contacted me and said he wanted to start a business. Would I mind if he didn't pay rent for 6 months?
Okay.
So I said, I'm sorry, if you can't pay, I can't do that. I have a mortgage to pay. But so after that, he kept paying his rent, because I said, if you, and I did the inspection, and so he was an okay tenant until I notified him that I needed the unit for myself, and I gave him 75 days as per the landlord tenant board. It's 60 days, but I gave him 75 days.
Yep.
And 1 month's free rent, and of course his last month's. He
Wow.
was quite
Okay.
upset. He was upset. He said, I won't be able to find a place for the same rent. I, wanted my children to continue going to school in this area. And I did tell him I understand. I wish the circumstances were different, but I need to move into my unit.
And so did he voice to you that he wasn't going to be leaving and to fight him?
No,
He just.
But I had a bad feeling. So I registered with the landlord tenant board right away, just in case.
Mm-hmm.
I also
That's good on you.
I also called them and talked to them and said, I'm really concerned. What if he doesn't move out? But actually, to back this up, before I even gave him a notice, COVID was going on. So I contacted the landlord tenant board and said, can I ask him to leave during COVID?
Mm-hmm.
They said, yes, no problem. People move all the time. You just have to fill out this form, serve it this way. 1 month free rent, last month, 60 days notice.
Mm-hmm.
I said, okay. But again, I had a bad feeling. So I called back the next day, spoke to someone else. They told me the same thing. And then I said, but what if the tenant doesn't move out? Not a problem. You just have to register with us and get a hearing and get an eviction notice. Not a problem. Oh, it never crossed my mind to say, and how long does that process take? So I served him the notice, had a bad feeling, registered it right away, and then 30 days later, he sent me an email saying, I will not be moving out September 1st, sorry. He wouldn't be moving out the last day in August.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that's when I contacted the landlord tenant board again. And someone different said, I wish you had spoken to me instead of someone else, because it can take a very long time to get a hearing.
Mm.
But you can apply for an expedited hearing, which I did. And when I applied for that, I said I would be homeless. My house was sold. I had to be out September 3rd. And they wrote back saying that that's not a reason for an emergency hearing.
Whew.
Yeah.
That pisses me off.
Yes. And then I contacted 3 different MPPs.
Mm-hmm. Who did you contact?
I contacted Lisa McLeod because she's in the Barrhaven area.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, I should have written notes.
It's okay.
I
It's okay.
contacted an MPP that was in the Maxville area where I lived.
Mhm.
Um, and my friend contacted a third one in Orleans, but I can't remember his name.
No worries. We'll put their names in the chat for later dates, because we want to know how many people are, you know, communicating with their MPPs, which MPPs are showing interest in trying to help you obviously navigate through this crazy system and almost advocate at the provincial level for these type of changes. So it's always great to encourage more and more people to do it, even though it seems like it's falling on deaf ears.
I agree, and I'm glad you brought that up because I am going to take the time next week to call all three MPPs and say, um, I understand you couldn't help me. You tried, but you couldn't. That's okay. But what have you done in the last 18 months to try and change the laws?
Yeah. It's a big beast. It's almost like political suicide for a candidate, especially with an election coming, to do what is necessary with hindering the concept of not getting votes. You know, if they see changes that are going to go to a landlord, that's when they're like, oh, you know, do we do it now? You know, you don't really want to make these type of changes. But again, you
You
know,
know, I understand that, but I wrote a letter to Doug Ford. I wrote a letter to the Attorney General, same letter, basically said, you know, how is it possible that I own a townhome and yet I am homeless? You know, how is it possible that I have to keep paying the mortgage, the property taxes, the insurance, pay for my stuff to be in storage um, while I wait for the landlord tenant board?
and how are you living for 18 months, like with your tenant inside your home, not paying rent? How
I was struggling. I lived out of a suitcase for 18 months, couch surfing. I lived off the kindness of friends and family.
Wow. And
And I even called the landlord tenant board and said, am I allowed to park my car in the driveway of my townhome and sleep in my car there? No. Am I allowed to put my belongings in the garage in my townhome so I don't have to pay for a storage locker? No.
yeah. And this is the concept with, even before with the COVID, everything being locked down, the N12s were just a part of that normal process. And luckily, through, you know, through advocacy and being loud and constantly trying to connect with the decision makers at the landlord and tenant board, you were able to get that expedited, right? But now the expedited in itself, it's got to go through that approval process, and they don't really tell you exactly what it is, but technically we're homeless, you know, or the landlord was going to be sued if the closing of that property didn't close because the tenants had not left. You know, these are all reasons that, or illegal acts, safety, and still they still go on the concept like landlord's mental health. I just took a call over this weekend, and this landlord's mental health was severely, like, he felt like he was going to die. He's having panic attacks. He's now on medication, and that is not grounds for them to be expedited at the landlord and tenant board. And we wonder, you know, how are they fixing this if they're not keeping us up to speed? Like, normally we had an associate chair at the landlord and tenant board, and she would always include the stakeholders. Now we have a new associate chair, and I guess she's just waiting to get her legs to see what her role is, how she's going to do it. But in the meantime, the portal is suffering, the landlords are suffering, even tenants who are not able to seek a hearing date quick enough to deal with, you know, landlords that are obviously not 100% landlords. You know, they're also being suffering because of a broken system. Now, Francesca, with what you experienced by giving the notice, going through, you know, the different people at the landlord and tenant board, getting something said to you by one, something different from the other, how would you want the landlord and tenant board to address N12 applications? So for you to move in for your own personal use, how would you want the landlord and tenant board to address that?
Well, I don't understand why you need a hearing at all. There's already, if I said I wanted to move into my place, but I really didn't, I just wanted to get the tenant out so I could bump up the rent. If I don't move into my house, I think there's a $25,000 fine.
It's gone to 50 now.
Okay, it's a $50,000 fine. What more do they want?
The system, they built this system, they created it. They made these changes through Bill 184, especially through the pandemic, that if you did evict your tenant or evicted your tenant unlawfully, there will be that $50,000 fine to a landlord or $250,000 for a corporation. So, and a tenant can take the landlord to court 2 years after they have left the property. So if they're always free to know that if this is your property, if they find that you didn't move into it, then there's now that process where the tenant can indeed go back to the court to prove that you didn't move into it. So for a landlord to know that education, to say, okay, I'm going to be heavily fined here if I do this just to get this tenant out, because a lot of people think that landlords just want the turnaround and, you know, the rents are low and whatnot. But sometimes the landlords just want good tenants that are paying on time, keeping the place clean. We don't want that turnaround. You know, sometimes it's nice just to know that your property is being well taken care of and you have great tenants that you can work with. So if you have punishments and a penalty for the landlord, why are we dealing with the landlord and tenant board for an N12 application, right? So this is something that we all need to be, when we're speaking with our MPPs, give this recommendation and give it and just say, here is the solution, here is the process. So if landlords are getting caught doing this, then obviously they're going to have to pay out of the nose in order to accommodate and have those money back to the tenants. So why are they dragging the system out? Why are they putting these N12 applications into the board, which is another reason why we have more of a backlog. So you can kind of tell when landlords are trying to sell their properties on a regular basis and tenants have to leave. Obviously, it's just another prolonging the inevitable. They're going to have to leave, but they obviously just want to prolong it.
Exactly. And it's not fair and it doesn't make any sense. What doesn't make any sense to me is if I go and steal a chocolate bar, I can be charged. And yet, why is someone allowed to live in a property and not pay their rent? And accumulate a huge debt that they're, you know, it's great for them to say, okay, here's your judgment. You're owed $25,000. How am I supposed to collect it?
And that's where the problem is that if you can go ahead and get a judgment against the tenant, trying to reserve or even trying to track them down after they vacate it in order to try to garnish their wages. That's why I'm lucky that we have FrontLobby, where you can report to Landlord Credit Bureau and to Equifax so that other landlords are being aware of this debt a lot sooner than waiting for the collection side of it to be hitting. So it's a great tool for us to be working in, especially for the screening mechanism to inform these tenants moving in that if this relationship does go south for these reasons, this is where it could affect you, right? And it really holds them to the standard, just because landlords are held at a standard of, you know, we have to protect everybody. We have to house everybody. We got to be their credit card. We got to be the person to help these our tenants out of debt. It's like, this is a business relationship. I don't really
exactly.
See, do they want me to get a credit card in my name for them? Like, what do you want me to do? So I totally get your feel there, because a lot of people, and you know what, you're not the only person. Like when we talk like this, a lot of people are like, why is the N12 there? You know, why are we held accountable just because we're just, it's a business transaction. Just like what happens if you go into the hotel and you decided to pay for 3 nights, but you want to stay for 5. What's going to happen?
You're going to be removed.
Exactly. And it's still housing.
Yes, but you know what? If for me personally, when I think about it, people need to eat food. Are we allowed to go to the grocery store and steal it?
No.
You know, people also need to get to work. Are we allowed to ride the bus for free? You know, if we lease a car and we don't make payments for 3 months, that car is gone.
Yeah.
Nobody says, oh my goodness, those car companies, they're horrible.
Yeah.
They don't understand. You have to get to work.
I'm surprised no one's protesting outside the grocery stores right now. Have you seen the price of food and what they're actually charging? Like, I'm like, oh, we ain't eating steak today, baby. We got some craft dinner. And even at
Yes.
that, the price went up. Like, we have to start, understanding that we're so scattered, that we have small landlords, we have medium-sized landlords, we have big ones. And the government, I think, is starting to use us as a private landlords as a social agency with no compensation. That's the bottom line, because if we're not asking for that speeding up the process, there is rent relief programs that are out there for tenants who are, if you are in any type of difficulties, you can seek rent relief. They have those. They even have relief for people with utilities. The concept is that you've got to make it not so damaging on one in particular landlord. So if you had that quick process, more landlords would open up the door. It takes a little bit more of a risk just because of the fact that they know they have a process, a fair process to remove that tenant if that communication breaks down, non-payment of rent happens, right? And
100%.
and if they think we're going to get 200,000 units, that's what we're short on right now, of 200,000 units. How are they expecting investors or even just homeowners to want to open up their secondary suites or want to create additional units on a property when they know how they're unfairly treated here in Ontario? And that's our problem, is that when you see landlords looking at the way that, you can have a property and here's the purchase price, this is the rental income that you can get, the property taxes, but unless you have a good tenant into that unit, this is where it's all going to start to unravel, and your investment is not an investment anymore. And that's the concept where a lot of tenants think, oh, it's an investment. You got to win some, you got to lose some. Is like, you know what? I think it's not so much as an investment. I think we have to start it saying it is a business, and it's a very essential business that is needed. And our government cannot keep building, managing, maintaining, and subsidizing government housing on taxpayers' dollars. They need to work for private investors, but instead, their tactic based on a election year is always going to be more restrictions, more penalties, more control. And this is where, whatever you guys do, if you're all listening, please do not vote NDP.
Well, whenever I'm listening to NDP in particular, they really don't offer solutions. What they're offering is penalties to landlords. And it's not like those penalties are going to help a tenant. They actually, they actually, if you have to pay extra taxes and extra fees, it's going to be reflected in the rent.
Oh, it's a no rent control. Like they're going to put rent control on everything. So if a tenant moves out, then you have to keep the rent at that in particular rate. And I'm like, and who's going to be building your housing if you do that? Like, you don't think that these landlords are going to pull their money out of the province? You got to keep the money in the province. You got to keep them building. And we have, and let's not talk about immigration. We'll have to do that on another show, but we have a ton of people coming to Canada on a regular basis. Where's the housing, guys? Like, you got to slow this down. Like, we're not keeping up to what is needed to address the housing. And then sadly, when we have our elected officials and they have the roundtable discussion, they don't get into the nitty gritty of the smaller landlords and the deep issue of the landlord and tenant board. Because believe it or not, people like yourself, you probably get into your home, get yourself settled, potentially want to get into more rentals. Not so much anymore, is it?
Actually, not only will I never invest and rent a place again, because being homeless for 18 months is huge. Imagine living out of a suitcase for 18 months, not knowing where I don't want to say I didn't know where I was going to sleep, because honestly, my friends and my family were very good to me. But I did have concerns. I didn't take it for granted. I didn't really feel safe.
Everyone wants to sleep on their own bed. It's that feeling. Like, I don't even like going away for the weekend where you're sleeping in a motel, or even for families' houses. Like, it's never that me. So I totally feel that out of place. And then
but it was also, this was one of my largest investments, and it was being held for hostage.
So now what happened? So did he actually, did you have your hearing?
Oh my God. It took 8 months to get the hearing.
Mm.
So the hearing was supposed to be on the Monday. You know 30 days before the hearing when you're having the hearing.
Mm-hmm.
So Monday was supposed to be on the hearing was supposed to be on the Monday. My tenant requested French language on the Friday.
Oh my God.
It's a tactic to postpone.
Yeah.
I got really lucky, and I had a hearing a month later. So 9 months later, I have a hearing. At that hearing, he kept talking in circles, and you have to send your evidence 7 days in advance.
Yeah.
I sent mine. He sent his in a way that no one can open. So when he asked for French language, that's when I went and hired a lawyer, because I realized this guy knows more than I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I've waited so long. So I hired a lawyer. The lawyer's office sent an email to him and the landlord tenant board saying, we can't open this evidence. We've requested, it requires a password. We've requested it and he hasn't given it to us. At the hearing, he said, I don't have good technology. I'm poor. Well, you have 2 kids. One of them's 21 and the other one is 13 in school. If you cannot afford a computer, they were given computers to go to school,
Mm-hmm.
to attend school online with internet access.
Mm-hmm.
So that really wasn't a valid excuse, but it was accepted. The adjudicator spent at least 30 minutes explaining to him that he had to pay his rent. He kept saying, no, I don't. And he said that, he had to have the opportunity to provide his evidence. 2.5 hours later, the adjudicator said, I can't keep doing this. We need another hearing.
Oh.
Yes. And she said, I know you've been homeless. I know this has been hard for you. And what was
I'll
really
try to get you a quick hearing.
Yeah, but what was really heartbreaking for me is I had 2 cats, 2 senior cats, that I had to surrender to a shelter. And they passed away in that shelter.
Aww.
So she said, I understand how hard this has been for you. And she goes, the hearing will be scheduled as soon as possible. 4 months. It took 4 months for the second hearing. Once again, he sent his evidence exactly 7 days in advance, a minute before midnight. It was 200 pages.
Wow. And nothing relevant to the why he thinks that you're not moving in.
The 200 pages contained a photocopy of every month he paid rent, the listing of the marital home that sold, like every picture, every page, the value, everything.
So he was helping your case?
My Facebook, a copy of my Facebook page, my LinkedIn page. There was not. What evidence can you possibly have? I want to move into my home. I've given an affidavit saying I'm moving into my home. I even provided a copy of the divorce agreement and the sale of the marital home. Like, what more do you want?
Yeah. And again, like it comes down to a tenant's situation. It's always, they don't require that much evidence from the tenant in a way of just trying to refuse to if they're becoming a nuisance to others, if they're not paying rent, like they don't go into detail with it. And for him to know the tactics on how to drag out the initial hearing. And that's what our landlord and tenant board needs to address. They need to look at the concept of, here's the evidence to you 7 days prior. You got to have a good understanding where you're going with this, right? After reading this 7 days prior to your hearing, that really it should be very quick introductions, like maybe 10 minutes a piece, explaining the landlord's application. The tenant's going to explain their situation. Then the adjudicator can ask of a situation, but a deep down, that's for a normal process. N12s, you're signing that affidavits. You're showing the proof that my house is sold. Here's my divorce papers. I do need to move into it. You're signing off, probably have family members saying, yes, she's living with me. She doesn't have another place to live. You know, there shouldn't be this process in where it's happening. And for our realtors out there who obviously are doing this exchange when they're selling tenanted rental homes, it's always a good idea to make sure that you're not putting it into the contract that the home will be vacant upon closing as well. You know, a lot of landlords are getting themselves stuck in that, just because even if a tenant says yes, they can totally switch that and it goes back on the other side of things. Now, Francesca, I hate to wrap you up, but I know I got a singing cake to do for an 18-year-old.
No problem.
2 18-year-olds. It's her boyfriend and her. Our birthdays are on the 6th and the 10th. So we're doing it all together, and there's a lot of ice cream cake. Oh my God. I just hate
so nice. Well, happy birthday to your daughter and her boyfriend.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. But I want to make sure that we can continue to get your voice and your story out there so that other people can learn of what you had to deal with and expect the worst. Cause it's always like expect good. You always have to expect the worst. And then what advice can you give our viewers, all of our landlords out there, especially our newbies or even our experienced investors? What advice would you want to give them?
I highly recommend that you join the Facebook groups like Solo, like your group, the Ottawa Landlord group, because you really learn from other landlords and what they're going through. Had I been part of a group like that, I would have been a lot more knowledgeable and a lot more prepared for what I was going to go through.
It's why we created it. We realized that we're all alone. Just when I started water billing, you know, I need more friends. I need more people to help me fight this. And that's when we started to realize that there was bigger issues with the Residential and Tenancy Act Landlord and Tenant Board. And we can say that we made some smidget changes throughout that 12 years, but we know we got to keep going. We got to do more, and we got to continue to keep building our community. And that's what I want to do by doing these videos, connecting with landlords like yourself, bringing you into our community and making sure that we're now helping you for your next adventures of whatever you want to do. If a landlord ever wants to get into it, well, let's fix it up first before you get back into it, Francesca. I know that your experience is what's going to help us get that news out there to the elected officials, because if we're not meeting with them in person, when you only have an hour to spew out every single issue that needs to be addressed at the Landlord and Tenant Board, and yes, the RTA is very broken and unbalanced, but the Landlord and Tenant Board, that's a train wreck.
It absolutely is. And the other recommendation I would make is, just as you said, we as individuals need to contact our MPPs. We need to keep writing letters to the Premier. We need to keep writing letters to the Attorney General, because even though you're not seeing results, if enough people keep reminding them how important this is, change will happen.
Of course. And hey, here's the idea. CC me, olwlandlords@gmail.com, in that letter to your elected officials, so that we can start compiling how many letters are being sent to our elected officials and which one. And remember, guys, don't look at the party leader for this election. Look at the individual that's going to be running for that party. Also, I've looked at the concept that, hey, we have the NDP looking to make a train wreck even worse. And then we have our new blue party, who is a fresh of breath air. We've seen little changes from the Conservatives, but we have to make sure that we're putting our money where our mouth is and making sure we're voting for this election. And it's not just provincial, municipal as well. It's very important that we all stay very intuitive of what's happening on a municipal level. And again, until we do this again, guys, we have to continue to keep building our community, keep bringing people together in the group. I do have a wait list to come into the group. So if you are trying to invite a friend, please reach out to me. I won't be doing this next week just because I'm getting ready to go to Toronto for the Canadian Multifamily Conference. so many people. I'm excited to see everyone there. It's always great to just be networking and, again, building that community no matter which place you go with. Francesca, thank you so much for coming on and telling me your story. And again, my heart goes out to you, and I'm glad that you're now positioned into your home so that we can, recover. Now it's about the recovery, but keep the fight up, because there's such more, because they did they did you wrong. They definitely did you wrong.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for inviting me on the show. And thank you for all the support you give landlords. It means so much.
Thank you so much, Francesca. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Subscribe to our Ontario Landlords Watch YouTube channel. Have a great night.